The matra gave me a fleeting glance before shaking his head. I apologize, ma'am, but your name does not have a reservation. My husband's family had invited me to supper, so they should have arrived by now. I blinked briefly, thinking, that's impossible. Be here. He smiled politely but firmly at me, and I merely made sure there was a reserve beneath Morgan Sinclair for 6. But I'm afraid a piercing, well-known voice broke through the Claire Morgan's voice echoed, brimming with chatter. I turned to look at my mother-in-law, and I was amused. Did you really think I would invite you to tonight's dinner? Standing a little distance away, wearing her typical luxury ensemble, with her platinum blonde hair combed to perfection, she sat. Adam, my husband, sat rigidly behind her, his eyes visibly darting between us. Uncomfortable, but remaining silent next to him, are his sisters Emma and Charlotte, smirking as they whispered to each other. I felt my stomach turn, but I didn't let it show. I realized that my voice calmed Morgan's smile. She laughed as though I had just said, "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd actually come." Had a humorous moment. This is a family meal, so a location like this is, well, out of your comfort zone. But don't you think a less expensive eatery could be more appropriate for you, Charlotte? Emma snickered behind her wine glass, avoiding my stare, while Adam sat there, holding his. With my fork mute, I felt the humiliation sink into the judgment in other visitors were starting to see their curious gaze flickering into the air, which was thick enough to suffocate them. Drama that was developing, I should have anticipated this for years. Morgan had made it. Given that I didn't attend school and didn't have the same wealth as her, it was clear that I was never good enough for her son. Elite schools. But I wasn't born into their world of privilege from the time Adam and I received Morgan. An engaged man initially made a subtle effort to remind me that I didn't belong. She would casually forget to invite me to family gatherings and make hostile remarks about my basic tastes. She would purchase pricey presents for Adam while ignoring me and only smiling apathetically. But tonight she had stolen items. She had taken this to an entirely new level. She had organized this for my husband's relatives to eat at a high-end restaurant in the city, ensuring that I would be left standing. She was relishing every moment of her unwelcome outsider entrance. The shame should have burned, and instead of feeling small, something inside of me clicked. She smiled slowly and deliberately, causing Morgan's gaze to momentarily falter. Second, I turned to the matra without saying anything. Would you kindly ask I requested the owner to come out in a smooth, assured voice, and Morgan laughed. Oh, since you asked, I turned back to ask whether you truly believe the owner of this establishment will come out here. I steadily looked her in the eye, certain that she was the owner of this. He knew me well at the restaurant, and in a little while, my beloved mother-in-law was about to receive a lesson she would never forget. Forgotten Morgan's smile remained constant, but I could see the tiniest glimmer of uncertainty in. She had been treating me like an outsider in her eyes for years, but tonight, I had played a small game and turned it into a complete humiliation, all in front of my husband and his sisters. The crowded restaurant was filled with anticipation. I refused to let her win the maitre d', and she hesitated, obviously unsure whether to laugh at my request. But before he could answer, Claire's tense voice broke through, so I turned just when Daniel Lon, the proprietor of this upscale institution, appeared. He was a man in his early 50s. She wore a well-tailored suit, had salt and pepper hair, and was the epitome of subtle elegance. Morgan's eyes widened a little as he reflected on the confidence that comes with owning one of the city's most sought-after restaurants. She noticed that he was looking at me with genuine interest rather than contempt. Hey, Daniel, I said, my smile growing. It had been a long time since he looked at me. Before focusing back on me, it briefly shifted to Morgan, Adam, and his sisters. This is what's brought you here tonight, I believe. Pointed to the table occupied by my in-laws, whose faces changed from amusement to something far more. I responded, I'm not sure, as if the reservation hadn't included me. Wouldn't you think Daniel's eyes clouded a little as he took in the implicit meaning of what I had said? His lips curled into a courteous smile. But it won't do at all, Morgan. Crossing her arms, she scoffed. Don't you think this restaurant can just find her a seat? This is a you. Don't just go into a private eating place expecting a table. And Daniel's expression stayed unreadable. You're entirely correct, Mrs. Sinclair. He said this with ease. I was disappointed to learn that the restaurant does not accept last minute Watkins. But before I could reply, he turned. CLA is not a walk in, though. As she is heading toward the metro, the whole table froze, and Charlotte's glass almost fell out of her hands. Emma's gaze flew between. Daniel and I were stunned, and Adam's hand gripped his silverware more tightly. But Morgan remained silent, but she didn't surrender easily, so she gave in. Out an incredulous laugh. Family. Oh, this is rich. You're wrong. Claire is. I can guarantee you that my son's wife has nothing to do with the fact that I interrupted her. Morgan narrowed her eyes as I leaned forward, and Daniel and I went back effortlessly. Before I married Adam, I used to speak just loud enough for people at the nearby tables to hear me. I was working in a fine dining establishment when Daniel, my mentor, suddenly became quiet. Morgan opened her lips to object at the table, but Daniel interrupted her with a he added quietly, Claire isn't just some former employee, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She trained. I taught her everything she knows about hospitality when she was just out of culinary school. She was among the best students I've ever had, and she provided excellent service. Morgan's jaw tightened. I could see the reality sinking in that this was not going as she had intended. Her attempts to disparage me, because I had a past that she was unaware of, and that suddenly called into question her whole ploy. And I wasn't. After finishing, I turned to face Maitre D, who was still awkwardly standing on his platform. Rely on Daniel's word to get me a seat on the Maitre D right away. Morgan's cheeks flushed scarlet. Of course, Miss CLA. I'll have the staff set a table immediately. This is absurd. Something I've never seen before, she muttered. Daniel laughed and said, You're telling me she gets special treatment just because she used to work for you? The maitre d' motioned for a server to come over and start setting up, because she deserved special care. Adjacent to Adam at their table, I pondered, figging. After all, Morgan's fingers clenched into fists on the surface, yet it appears that there is actually plenty of space. Tablecloth. This is ridiculous. I lowered my voice just enough so that she was the only one who could. Her nostrils flared. And you're being ridiculous because you believed you could humiliate me and get away with it. I shrugged. Not being dramatic, but I'm simply having dinner with my family. Daniel stroked my shoulder before she retaliated, and I'll have the chef come over. Claire. Morgan came dangerously close to strangling something unique for you. Morgan was obviously furious now, but there was a unique smile from Daniel on the house. There was nothing she could do, so Adam reached for his drink. But I noticed a brief change in his expression. Was it relief? Humiliation and embarrassment? I wasn't certain. But I did know that this dinner had only started, and Morgan Sinclair would later come to regret ever imagining that I might be. The waiter presented me with a newly gleaming silver plate, and then an exquisite dish. Entertained something delicately constructed in an artistic manner that is completely complimentary. Thanks to Daniel Morgan's unadulterated expression, I was filled with fury as I picked up my fork and proceeded to cut through the food. This looks amazing. Practiced ease. I tried a mouthful and liked it. Only the flavor, but also the delectably tense stillness that ensued between Charlotte and Emma. And Adam exchanged cautious looks. Adam had yet to speak, opting instead to gazing at his wine glass as if it held the answers to his problems. Morgan was not the type to accept it. She put the glass down after taking a slow drink of her own wine, defeating it gracefully. Well, she said. She applied a bit too much force, making a tight grin. I guess it's only fitting that someone like you would be familiar with individuals in hospitality. Morgan waved a fidgeting hand, and I raised an eyebrow. Courteousness. You understand that the waiting tables, culinary labor, and service industries are not quite. The actual explanation was the types of jobs we're used to in this household. She had planned the whole act, and it wasn't just about keeping me out of supper. It was also about reminding me I took another step in front of everyone who, in her opinion, still saw me as a lady who had risen from nothing. You mentioned that before answering, as if it's a terrible thing that Morgan's eyes briefly flashed with. She had anticipated me to be annoyed, perhaps even a little surprised. Shaken, but I wasn't anymore. I only meant that she went on. It must have been quite an adjustment for you to marry into a family like ours. Her tone was gentle, yet her words were profound. Condescension was evident, yet Adam persisted in his statement. Nothing happened, so I turned to face him and observed his avoidance of eye contact. Suddenly it dawned on me that this was about more than just his mother's brutality. It was about his. There has been silence since Morgan's previous attempt to embarrass me. She conveniently forgot to invite my side of the family to the rehearsal dinner at our wedding. Had occurred when she gave me a booklet called Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife for Christmas in front of. She had made a snarky comment in front of a whole room last summer, thinking about how lucky I was that Adam had risked his life for me, and how each time he had forgiven me, I told myself that it wasn't worth arguing about, because I didn't want to start a quarrel. But this was different. This was not just a passive-aggressive remark. It was a planned attempt to embarrass me in public, and he had allowed it. I set down my wine glass and, after a slow, deliberate movement, Morgan, I spoke in a calm, steady voice as I leaned forward a little and rested my elbows on the table. Despite her interest burning in her eyes, she tilted her head, asking, "Do you know what the difference is between you and me?" I smiled to myself, having worked hard for everything I own, and then a sudden, horrified hush descended. Morgan's face tightened on the table. I apologized for not blinking. "You heard me?" Charlotte tensed up next to her mother, Emma, and she squeezed her lips together. Morgan scoffed, as if holding back a joke. "Are you implying that I left the question open-ended because I haven't worked for what I have?" And then before I added that I didn't marry into riches and didn't inherit it, so she could come up with another patronizing reply. "Status, I began my career anew. But we are eating at the same restaurant," and I pointed to the table. Morgan's fingers curled around her napkin, her knuckles white, and she ate the same cuisine with the same amount of attention from the owner. Emma and Charlotte had stopped giggling, and Adam appeared to be, for the first time since I'd met Morgan, I wanted to burrow beneath the table after seeing anything flicker across. Her expression, which she typically kept too well, was one of fear rather than rage. Due to the fact that she had spent years attempting to persuade herself that I wasn't worthy, that I was inferior, and that I was simply some gold digger who had taken a shine to her son, but she was now beginning to acknowledge the reality, which was that she couldn't break me. Calmly, the first picked up my fork and started cutting into my food again. Morgan let out a loud exhale through her mouth, clearly annoyed that I had hijacked the conversation. I smiled slowly. Purposeful, I took a bite of food and put it in my mouth, chewing. "You should be careful who you look down on." The tension at the table was progressively increasing before adding, "You never know who might end up above you." Morgan, who is often composed and in total control, sat stone-faced and suffocated her. Adam appeared to want to break her wine glass, and his fingers were curled so tightly around it that I half expected it to. Charlotte and Emma were stealing glances at one another, obviously unsure of whether they should interfere, and I never felt more certain about where I fit in. Morgan's face showed that her well-constructed facade of dominance had briefly broken. She had established her authority by getting people to submit to her demands, because they were too scared or I wasn't scared of her, but I was too courteous to correct her. Nevertheless, Morgan took a deep breath to gather herself, before setting her glass down with a gentle, yet thoughtful click. I noticed that she finally said in a dishonest tone, "Well, I guess I should give you credit, CLA, for being able to improve yourself." I took another sip of my wine, not providing her with the joy of a response. "But if you're telling me," she kept her lips curving into a saccharine smile. I paused, and Charlotte exclaimed, "So independent, so self-made. Why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle?" With a little gasp, Emma shifted uneasily, and Adam shuddered at Morgan's smile. Heightened, she could sense the table's eyes on me. I put down my glass and waited for a response. I asked, "What do you mean by that?" With slow, methodical gestures. Morgan leaned forward in bewilderment, lowering her voice to a derisive whisper. "Darling, you don't really have that beautiful little boutique job because of my son, do you?" She tilted her head. "You talk about self-sufficiency, but at the end of the day, her head and arrogant smile return. It was her last card, and you're still just someone my son supports. The ultimate blow was to return me to my former self. The insult intended to degrade me beyond repair. I was in a location where I allowed the words to sink in, watching Adam's continued refusal to look at me. The way his sisters held their breath, anticipating my breakdown, made me burst into laughter. Morgan gives a very sincere, embarrassed laugh. Morgan's smirk, I put my napkin back on the table after making a hilarious alteration. I'm still laughing because I just understood how disconnected you are, Morgan. Her eyes. Excuse me, please. I pointed to Adam and spoke in a calm, thoughtful tone. I suppose he agrees with me, I inquired, and he arched a lovely brow. Charlotte choked. Morgan's smile faded as Emma's lips opened in surprise, and Adam's turned pale. What are you talking about right now? I sighed, almost feeling sorry for her. But you can still see Adam is your little son. Aren't you the one in charge? The one who provides for him? I tilted my head, but let me tell you something. You saved me from my humble life. You want to know what's amusing, Morgan? Morgan tensed. That's not how this marriage works. I carried on Adam's business, and half of his investment ventures were financed by me. A startled stillness descended upon the table, and Morgan's eyes expanded throughout. She whispered that the world was changing in real time, and I smiled, was cold. Adam didn't start his profession by himself, so I kept going, talking to her while maintaining eye contact with my spouse, who lacked the capital to begin investing, was crucial. I grabbed up my wine glass once more, but I did Morgan's fingers instead. Twitched. That isn't feasible, I shrugged, thinking you one understand your desire, but the truth is that my tactics and investments are the foundation for your son's success. And with my assistance, Charlotte and Emma glanced at Adam to get his approval, but he remained silent. You think you can make me look foolish by painting me? I shook my head, locked in place. It's ridiculous that I'm a dependent little housewife because the reality Morgan Adams' expression darkened as he realized how much more I need him than he needs me. With a hue of scarlet, I crossed my arms and leaned back. You've been trying for years to make me feel out of place. Yet I've been the one to maintain this marriage and, consequently, your priceless family. Name-floating Emma appeared on the verge of passing out entirely to Charlotte. Unable to speak, Adam finally opened his mouth, croaking, maybe we should. I interrupted him by holding out a hand. No, Adam, I stated firmly. You don't get to, perhaps we should talk now rather than after you sat there in silence while your mother attempted to make fun of you. For the first time, Morgan realized as she stared at him that her kid was golden boy showed no courage at all, and she abruptly lost her pride in him. Now, for the first time, she gave him the impression that he was little and below her standards. As if he had, having failed to give her a tasty role reversal, I got up and smoothed out my dress. I think I'm finished here, but you can't just turn because Morgan's nostrils flared. It was nice to see you, Daniel, who had been observing from a respectful distance. Daniel nodded, amused. Thank you for the hospitality. It's always a pleasure. Claire, then I glanced at Adam, who paused, first looking at me and then at his mother, and I realized right then and there what he was going to do, because Morgan smiled since Adam had never picked me before, and he wasn't going to start. Triumphant, and I returned the smile, as she was unaware that I had already made my decision, and she would soon come to regret even attempting to put. I was in my place, ready to show her and Adam just how strong I was. Adam didn't follow me at all, which surprised me. The cool night air brushed across my skin as I left the restaurant, but I hardly noticed it because my thoughts were. It was evident that this dinner had served as a long overdue wake-up call and an epiphany. After years of preparation, it was time to take action, so I took out my phone and fingers, steady while I sent a message to myself, we're going to move forward and start the process. The response arrived seconds later, and the lawyer knew you'll possess the initial draft of the divorce settlement by noon. I let out a leisurely breath while gazing at I wasn't afraid of the term screen divorce, but rather of how long I had ignored it. Fact that Adam had never supported me, and that I had been alone myself in my own marriage for years, but tonight I am not alone. Morgan was unaware of how completely I was about to upend the world, but he had provided the last push I needed. She had worked so hard to keep me under control that I got home before Adam, giving me just enough time to finish the tasks at hand. After finishing my tasks, I walked into Adam's home office, which served as his. He had never updated the passcode when I unlocked the safe with investments. All of the bank statements, investment portfolios, business agreements, and other financial documents contained errors. The contract that linked his most profitable investment to my original investment piqued my curiosity the most. This was the paper that demonstrated my financial strength, and I picked it up by skimming the familiar legal jargon. Morgan believed her son was the family's best businessman throughout his entire empire. However, without me, he was nothing. I quickly snapped a picture of the contract and put it in. I returned it exactly where I found it. Since I already had what I needed, there was no reason to take it. Next, I took a suitcase out of the bedroom and started packing, not in a hurry or with anger, but in complete clarity. This was a well-considered choice, not an emotional one. Leaving, I was waiting on the couch with the suitcase by my side when Adam entered through the front door, inclined my head and took you, Claire, and halted in the doorway, peering at me as if he wasn't sure if he had arrived home to the correct place. His breath caught as his eyes flitted to the suitcase. What are you doing? I stood up calmly, leaving Adam's mouth slightly agape. Back at the dinner, I said. You made your choice, Adam, without saying anything. His jaw stiffened when your mother made fun of me once more, and I laughed while attempting to maintain harmony with your mother, Adam. She intentionally booked a table and left me off of the reservation in order to disgrace me during this entire dinner. He insulted me and attempted to make me feel unwelcome, so I moved closer to observe him. You let her shrink a little under my eyes, as you usually do. It's complicated, Claire. He scratched the back of his neck, obviously flustered. I let out a sigh, knowing how she is, but no, Adam, it's easy. I was upset when his eyes suddenly met mine, but it was the reality you've spent our Adam. I was patient with you throughout our marriage, allowing your mother to control how you treat me. I gave you a lot of opportunities, but today I shook my head and recognized you for what you. I groaned. Are Adam and Claire swallowed hard? Let's just discuss this. There's nothing more to discuss, Adam. So I grabbed up my suitcase and walked by. As I reached the door, I said, I'll fight you on this. If you believe you're walking. Adam's voice was low, and his features had darkened. You're wrong. I looked at him for a while before leaving this marriage with half of everything. Before grinning, I muttered, Oh, Adam, very quietly. You should thoroughly review your own contracts. A sudden look of confusion flashed across his face. You wouldn't even have half of what you own if I cut him off. If it weren't for me, you would have built your investments with my money and guessed. His face was pale when I walked on it, and I have all the documentation to prove it. I'll be quieter and let you borrow my money, Adam. I'll let you construct Adam staggered. Something's wrong with it, but now I smile. Now I want it back. Back a step because he believed he could scare me, but reality hit him all at once. Adam was standing motionless in the entryway, unsure of who he was interacting with. I could see his pale face and clenched jaw as he realized I wasn't there. He probably opened his mouth to say that I was taking what he believed he controlled. He tried to plead, argue, and control me like he always had, but I refused to give in. As I adjusted my bag strap, I mentioned that I might be staying in the penthouse. His eyebrows were furrowed over my shoulder. What penthouse? I tilted my head and grinned. I saw the misunderstanding transform into a little, Adam, the one you believe you own, he said. Horror. The downtown penthouse, in a voice that was different from the one I purchased. Yes, I said calmly, and I had my attorney look over the ownership documents under my name. Adam, that wasn't yours earlier today, his nostrils flared. Wouldn't I? I took an envelope out of my backpack and tossed it onto the counter, but he stopped before opening it. His gaze flicked across the official document in his shaking hands. I nodded as I swallowed the statement that you own 51% of my investment company. Yes, his respiration became shallow, but that couldn't have happened. I shrugged, but I wasn't. The original investor. Keep in mind that I never gave you ownership. Simply thought I did since, well, you never did read the contracts. I saw panic take over his features, and I'm sure his mind was racing. He responded, voice tight, you can't, leaving me wondering how in the world he had allowed this to happen. I grinned and said, just take this from me. I already own it. I'm not taking anything. This man, who had allowed his mother to degrade me while I was sitting there, lurched back and gripped the counter, cowardly quiet as she attempted to deprive me of my honor. But now, he was, why are you doing this? Mumbled the helpless. I don't understand. For the first time in years, I felt completely free because of Adam. After saying, I finally see my worth, I turned and walked away. A month after leaving the house for the final time, I sat in the penthouse with my legs crossed and a glass of, with champagne. In my hand, my lawyer grinned and passed the completed divorce documents in my direction. You're officially free now. I let out a deep breath while rubbing my fingers together. The last 3 weeks have been hectic due to the hefty paper fee. Adam had attempted to fight, but the combat was brief and harsh, and he had obviously charged into meetings that threatened to take me to court and wanted a better bargain. But as soon as my attorneys presented the documentation demonstrating that I actually owned the majority of his company, his haughtiness had crumbled, and Morgan had attempted to stop her from calling me frustrated and accusing me of being a snake that digs for gold. I replied that this wouldn't have happened if you had raised him better, and I then blocked her number. I raised the champagne glass to my lips, relishing the moment, since Morgan Sinclair was no longer my issue. Then, as my phone buzzed, Adam. If the universe wanted to give me one last giggle, could we? Chat, I grinned, put down the glass, and typed back to you about the pause. I simply don't know what to do, Adam. I shook my head and breathed. It was somewhat depressing, because I had been waiting for Adam for years. I had waited for him to confront his mother and fight for me, so that he could be the man. I believed I had married. I had previously defended him, but now I recognized him for who he really was. He lived his entire life hidden by those too weak to take charge. Ironically, he needed me more than ever to build anything on his own. Yet the second sent him a final message saying, that's not my problem, because I didn't need him at all. Afterward, I also blocked his number as, for the first time in my life, I was making the decision to be myself, and that was the strongest thing I've ever done.